Hello, this time making a kind of weird medieval fantasy tower. Something that could be turned at 28 or just generic fantasy. So starting off with a few sketches, I'm going to have a large stone circular base with a tower on top of that, with thatched roofs and some plaster walls with timber framing. To begin with, took some foam core, cut out a base, then cut out a circle in the middle for the platform. Then taking a long strip of foam core and scoring it around so you can make a nice curved edge. Using hot glue to fasten the base together. And this wall thing will provide a basis for the stonework that will go around it. Then to finish off the base at this stage, just taking a knife and beveling the edges. To create the stonework, I took strips of styrofoam, then cut them to different lengths to make larger bricks and smaller ones. And to give them a rock texture, taking a tinfoil ball and smushing one side of it down. I don't bother doing two sides, as the back side will be glued to the wall and you won't see it anyway. Having two different sizes of bricks mean you can start with the larger ones at the bottom, then work up to smaller ones, so you get a nice little variation in the stonework. It also speeds up the process by gluing it around the base, as you have larger bricks for that area. I used hot glue for this, although you do have to be careful, otherwise you get a lot of stringing, and hot glue can end up poking out between the edges of the bricks, so using the tiniest amount on the very centre of the bricks is the safest way to do that. To avoid this on the top, I'm just using matte Mod Podge, then layering up stones around a centrepiece. Taking some offcuts of styrofoam and applying some rock texture using the tinfoil ball, I then glued them against the edge of the wall at the base, so you'd have some natural stones where they're layered up against the sides. The next step is to mix up some sculptor mold, which is a modelling compound made of kind of papery fibre type stuff. So you combine it with water and it makes a kind of lumpy, slurridgy type thing. This mixture can then be applied to the base and it'll dry over the course of a few hours. But you have maybe 20-30 minutes working time where you can easily push it into shape and smush it around with your fingers. I also applied this on the top of the piece, then smoothed it down with my fingers so it would only fill in the cracks between the stones, so you get a nice mortar effect. Putting the base to one side so it has time to fully dry, I moved on to the tower itself. I used foam core to bulk out the shapes, then taking some balsa wood beams, trimmed them down to size, and attach them onto the edges, overlapping slightly on each of the edges so you'd have an area where the plaster could fill in between. I also applied some rough stonework to the bottom of the building, so you'd have a bit more of a transition between the stone base and the plaster and timber sections, using matte Mod Podge to attach that around the base of the foam core. At the top of the building I only wanted timber planking, so taking some coffee stirrers, I glued those along the edge to make some planks. I also wanted an external platform, so again taking more of the coffee stirrers and matte Mod Podge, I put together some walkways that would go around the top of the building. With most of the framework done and the wooden pieces in place, it was time to fill in the gaps and create the plaster effect, so taking more matte Mod Podge and watering it down slightly more so it's a bit smoother, then using the flat edge of a sculpting tool to press it down some. So some areas are lumpier, some areas are smoother, and you try and fill in the gaps between the stonework as well. And this will all contribute towards kind of a ramshackle effect. Probably not built by the best architect, but that's kind of the vibe we're going for. I also realised I forgot to trim down most of the timber beams to make them look a bit more rougher. But again, that kind of goes towards the ramshackle effect of it, so I trimmed a few down now, but left some of them clean. Jumping back to the base, I made some texture paste, combining sand, cork flock, black gesso, and some PVA glue. Stirring this together until it's a nice lumpy mess, then applying that over the base, using a tiny spatula. The texture paste gives it a nice earthy texture, and you can also use it to fill in a few gaps in the stonework, where the sculptor mould might have pulled away. While that's not dry, I also pushed a few small aquarium rocks into the base, so you get a bit more variety on top of the grit and the cork that's already in there. At this point I decided we're making a windmill, so taking more of the coffee stirrers and some super glue, I created some wind blades. I'm assuming that's what they're called, but I did not bother to Google it. I did, however, look up a few patterns of the actual, like the wind bits, so taking some smaller pieces of the coffee stirrer, I glued in a pattern down the length of each of the blades. Then once that was drying, I applied a layer of black gesso over the entire piece. For the wooden sections I used it slightly watered down, and undiluted on the plaster sculptor mold sections. This will preserve some of the wooden grain, which is better than anything I can paint myself. Then taking burnt umber, I applied a layer of that over the entire thing, both the windmill and the base. The plaster sections then got a coat of tan paint, while the wooden beams got a light dry brush of white paint. Taking more of the white paint, and giving a dry brush over the stonework as well. To create some thatched roof sections, I took some of this fir trim, which I got from a local craft store, trimmed it down to size so it fit the lower areas, then gave it a haircut so it'd be a bit more like hay. Once that had been trimmed down and all the excess fibres had been removed, I took some more black gesso and gave it a thick coat of that. Going back to the stonework and giving it another highlight of white paint, just to catch the very top details, and some of the grouting between. To add a bit more variety in the colour, I took some green paint, watered it down, and applied it over the timber beams, as well as the stonework, where you get the effect of kind of lichen and moss growing up. Then taking some watered down black paint, I hit the plaster sections, and any of the edges of the wood where I felt it was a bit too bright. The thatch roofing got a layer of brown paint once the black gesso had dried. And at this stage we just want to give it a really thick coat so we can actually bulk up the fibres. And this was followed by a layer of tan paint. With those then dried, I glued them into place using hot glue. I wanted some more colour on the base, so taking some matte Mod Podge, I dabbed around. Then taking my static grass applicator, I added some autumn grass in a few patchy areas. With that secure, it was time for the best part, tufts. Taking my tweezers and a few choice tufts, I added some bushes and foliage around the base. Keeping it kind of an autumnal palette, so greens and browns. Then adding a few final details such as the roof on the top of the building, and a few support timbers underneath the walkway and supporting said roof. I felt it needed a bit more growth on it, so I'm mixing up two types of clump foliage, one more of a flock and the other more of a foam. I took some matte Mod Podge and mixed it up into a paste. This I then applied around the base and on the tower, so you get a kind of mossy area building up. Also another great one to put in the gaps of the stonework, where you naturally get growth building up, and can fill any weird holes that have appeared. This also applies to any weird areas of plaster, or any gaps between the timber beams. For the very final touch, I took some leaf hole punches, one from AK Interactive and the other from Green Stuff World. Then taking a few colours of painted paper, clipped out a few leaves and attached them around the base, using matte Mod Podge to attach them. Leaves are a great way to add a little bit of colour, and just a little bit of extra detail to your builds. And again, cover up any weird errors you want to correct. And with those leaves added, it was complete. So we have two pieces, a stone base and a large windmill, that can combine to create an even bigger windmill. Or I suppose the base could be some kind of burial mound, or the base of a fortification, or something else I could add on later. But yeah, a sort of fantasy setting agnostic, but a little bit kind of fantasy grimdarky looking. So it should fit in with a few different settings and games, and I should get a fair bit of use out of it. Thanks so much for watching, I hope to catch you next time.